Holloway. Thank you, Marilyn.
Good morning, everyone. It's so nice to be here with everybody on this lovely morning. It's kind of damp, but it's wonderful, nice and warm. So our theme for this month is presence, and really appropriate because it's today is the second day of Advent. So Advent means the coming forth, and it's all about the coming forth of the presence of the Christ into this world. So let's take a moment and find out what presence means. It actually comes from the Latin praesens, which means, pra is before, and the verb is esse, and the present participle is praesens, which means to be before. Prae means before, and esse means to be, so it's coming to be before. So coming into being, or being at hand, being here now. So what is presence? Yes, it's being here now. It's also that feeling of a presence. Has anybody ever felt that feeling that there is a presence? The feeling of maybe being looked at. It could be from another person, some beam of consciousness directed our way. And I want to share here an experience I had. This was a couple of years ago, and I was gardening, and kind of at the end of my garden, and the end of the driveway, and I felt something. And I looked up, and there was this young coyote looking at me. And it was this incredible moment, this beautiful young coyote with this beautiful presence. You could feel that presence. And it was kind of like the beam of his wonderful, clear, wild consciousness directed at me. And it's like, wow. And it's almost like that consciousness awakens something in yourself. So there's this response back. So for a moment, there was this connection between me and this coyote. And it's this beautiful, beautiful being. And then being a wild coyote, he kind of looked at me and then he took off. But it was such a precious moment, just a reminder of that divine spark in a wild animal that awakened something in me, like this love. It's wow, and how beautiful you are. What a wonderful being, and thank you. So that's the coyote. And I'd like to share with you, actually, having looked at the meaning of presence, what ChatGPT has to say about presence, because it's kind of interesting. If it will come up, here we go. Come on. Okay. So presence reveals, Presence reveals your true nature. When you become deeply present, the sense of me, defined by thought, softens. What remains is spacious, aware, peaceful. Presence is not something you do, it is what you are when the mind becomes quiet. Presence uncovers the self behind the personality. And I think that's something about that coyote. It's kind of like the self is gone and there's just these two connections, this one connection between two beings. Presence dissolves separation. In presence, the gap between me and the world narrows. The trees, the sky, the breath, and the body are all felt as movements of one life. And again, that reminds me of my experience with the coyote. This unity is what many traditions call the Tao, Brahman, the kingdom within, Buddha nature, the beloved. Spiritual significance, presence is the felt experience of oneness. And a third thing here, presence is the doorway to the divine. When you rest fully in this moment, the subtle dimension of life opens up, a sense of guidance, a quiet inner knowing, a felt connection to something larger. Mystics across the world, across traditions, describe this as the place where the soul meets God. And the spiritual significance here, presence is the inner self, the inner altar where the sacred becomes accessible. So presence is the inner altar where the sacred becomes accessible. And presence frees you from the story of the ego. The ego survives by living in past and future, regrets, fears, identity, narrative. Presence pulls you out of these mental constructions. In the silence of now, ego loses its grip. So presence is the liberation from illusion. And presence heals. Deep presence is inherently healing. It settles the nervous system. It dissolves emotional contraction. It brings clarity behind confusion. It transforms suffering into wisdom, not by fixing anything, but by allowing everything. So presence brings the soul back into harmony with itself. And then presence is the highest form of love. When you give someone your full presence, you offer acceptance, attention, compassion, stillness. This is why spiritual teachers say presence is love without form. So presence is love in its purest state. And presence is the natural state of awakened consciousness. Enlightenment, awakening, liberation, all these are ultimately descriptions of a mind free enough to stay rooted in presence. Presence is both the path and the destination. Presence is awakening itself. So I really like that. I find that very helpful to dive into ChatGPT sometimes and see what it has to say. And sometimes it goes way deeper than I can. So we're looking at that. We do feel the presence of others, even when they're not physically present, even when they're not even in physical form. And I did have another experience of mine, and this is many years ago when my son Patrick was going through a very difficult time in his teenage years. And I was in prayer for him. I was really, really worried about him. And I was sort of kneel down in prayer, and I felt this blue presence surrounding me. And this inner voice that said, you have to let him go, you have to give him to God. And it's like, wow, this felt like the presence of a Mother Mary telling me, you need to let go. You need to let him live his own life and find his own path, which of course we all have to do with our kids, difficult as it is sometimes. So again, there was definitely a presence there. And who knows, that my interpretation of it was there was the Holy Mother guiding me. So we're all aware of these experiences and maybe have them. They are a feeling of connection. The divine in me greets the divine in you. And all that said, it does seem to me that we're more readily acknowledge the divine out there than we do the divine in ourselves. We just see it in the other, but not in ourselves. It would seem to be a step too far, conceitedness or even hubris to acknowledge the divine within. And I think we tend to do that. We see that out there is the divine, but that can't possibly be within me. But as much humility as it takes to bow down to the divine out there, I would suggest it takes even more humility to bow down to the divine within you. In fact, a great deal of humility. And I think of the example of people who gather around the great spiritual teachers, bowing down to them, sitting at their feet. But the true teacher is like a finger pointing to the moon. The true teacher is saying, don't look at the finger, look at the moon. Is saying, look at that light within. An example here is Ramana Maharshi, who was an Indian saint of the 20th century. When he was 16, he suddenly had this great fear of death come upon him. And rather than staying in fear, he decided to go deeply into it and almost like experience his dying within. And in doing so, he was asking the question, who am I? And repeating that question over and over again, who am I? And through this, he had a major enlightenment experience. And he went on to teach many, many people. And people would come to him and sit at his feet, and he would tell them to ask themselves, who am I? Who am I? Keep asking that question, because it always points back to the place within. So all this brings me in a very circuitous way. Excuse me a minute, I need to get Kleenex. Okay. So all this brings me in a circuitous way to the Christmas story, the birth of Jesus to the Virgin Mary. Except it really begins months before that, at the time of the Annunciation, when the angel comes to Mary to let her know that she will bear the Christ child. She is this young woman. She must have been very much without some of the baggage we all carry, that stuff we've accumulated in our growing up and our young adulthood, of fears for the future, concerns about the past, what I've done wrong, what I should be doing, etc., etc., etc. And she must have been very clear of that, because she was so open. And I think this is what the meaning of the word virgin is, that she was very open and clear and innocent, without all the baggage that most of us have all the time. So she was very unburdened by the kind of mental and emotional stuff that we all carry. In the story, she is not divine herself, but chosen as the vessel of the divinity. God's seed was to be given to her to grow as God's son. Back then it was thought that the male planted the seed within the woman, and basically it was the male's child growing within the woman. And of course we now know that it takes two. And the seed, the egg, is already within the woman. So it's kind of like that potential is already there. And it just needs that fertilization from the divine, that joining with the divine for this divinity to grow within. So from this point of view, in a metaphysical sense, Mary's recognition of the presence of God within, through accepting what the angel has to say, and her humble acceptance and recognition of this, opens her up to the presence and for the growth of the child within her. I think this is the message to us all about the Christmas story, that we all, male and female alike, contain the seed, the potential for full divine consciousness to develop. It may take some time. After all, it took Mary 9 months for this Christ child to grow within her. And for many of us, it's going to take the touch of the divine, maybe awaken something in us for a while, but it might take years or months or a lifetime, or maybe even many lifetimes, for that to fully mature and for us to come forth as fully enlightened beings. But once that beam has touched us from without, the spark within is kindled. So although we might have received that spark and it might have kindled something within us, and maybe over time that sort of fades and we lose sight of it, but it's never lost. And I've always been assured of this from the Buddhist teachings I've received, that whatever way you have grown in your physical life, in this current life, it's never lost. If you're coming back for more lives, that potential has to grow even more is always there. It seems that we often do need that outer stimulus for the inner development to happen. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama, I remember one talk he gave, and he was talking about this inner potential. And he talked about how even very wild and very aggressive animals can be tamed, can flourish through patience and love. And he said this is so because they already have that seed of love within them. And I think this is very interesting, because sometimes we don't recognize that even a wild animal has this seed within them, has this potential, that it's already, that they wouldn't be able to recognize our love from without if they didn't have it within themselves. And I think that's a beautiful thought, and it really reflects the idea that whatever we are experiencing is both within and without. And I'd like to share here another story, and something I came across just recently, just a few days ago. It was a little video, and there's this young man in Seattle, and he had often taken in animals for them to be placed, wild animals, for them to be placed either back in the wild or in a sanctuary. And somebody called him to say there was this caracal. A caracal is a kind of wild cat. It's a bit bigger than a domestic cat. It comes from arid areas in Africa and in parts of Asia. It's a beautiful, beautiful creature, quite long-legged, and it has long pointed, tufted ears, just an exquisite creature. So he said yes, he'd take this caracal in and get it accustomed to being around humans at some point, and then it could go into a sanctuary, because obviously it couldn't go back in the wild, because the wild was in Africa, far away. So this creature had been found in a crate, I think I can't remember the rest of the story, but in an airport or somewhere like that. So this poor creature was in a crate and been abandoned somehow. So he picked this creature up and took it home, and he opened the crate and she wouldn't come out. And he had placed some food down, and she was hissing and growling. He was very, very patient. He put some food and water and just waited. Eventually she came out very cautiously to get some food. And it took days and days and days, but he was very patient. He was there, just watching her, not directly eye contact, but just there for when she needed him. And then one day, to his surprise, he was sitting down in his living room, and she came up and sat right beside him, touching him. And from that moment, this relationship between this caracal and this man developed. And eventually she wanted him to pet her, she would snuggle with him, she would play with him. And there was some footage of this. It's just delightful, just this exquisite, beautiful creature. And she would be sitting in front of him, and he'd be fondling her ears, and she just loved it. So eventually the time came, she was going to be released to a wildcat sanctuary. So the time came for her to be released, so he took her to the sanctuary with a heavy heart, because he had really, really bonded with her. And they got to the sanctuary and opened the crate, and she wouldn't get out. And she wouldn't get out, and they kept trying to coax her out, and she kept looking at him and looking at him. And in the end, the keeper of the sanctuary said, I think she's bonded with you, that she would really be much happier staying with you. And he was quite relieved. He's like, yes. So he took her home. He kind of redid his whole home, so she could really exist within the home, and I think he would take her for walks on a leash. These cats can jump apparently 10 feet in the air, because they can catch birds in midair, so they're very athletic. But just amazing that the bond was so strong. He had awakened that love within her, that she loved him so much, and he loved her so much, that the bond was so strong, so it was just there. Anyway, this whole thing seems to be so complicated in a sense, but another sense is very simple. And there's a Tibetan practice, Tibetan practices called deity practices, where you imagine that deity is not like a creator god, but rather a meditational deity that represents some qualities. And an example is Tara, say green Tara, who is compassion in the form of courage and fearlessness. And the meditation the practice involves visualizing green Tara out there sitting in front of you, seeing her qualities, and then bringing those qualities of fearless compassion and love into yourself and bringing them into your heart, because that is already within yourself. So the idea is that whatever qualities are out there, you can recognize them out there and bring them within yourself, because those qualities are already within you, and they enhance those qualities so that we can embody them. So they're quite complicated practices in a way, but the idea is really quite simple, that whatever we think is good, that we think is out there and not within us, is actually within us We're recognizing it because we already have it. So the divine pervades everything and is in everything and everybody. So if you feel comfortable, let's take a few minutes and explore this in an inner way. So if you'll sit up straight and take a few deep breaths in. Breathe in deeply and release. Breathe in again and release. One more deep breath. Now imagine that you are in a very beautiful place, maybe sitting by a stream, and a presence comes towards you. It could be a human presence, or even an animal of some kind. But this presence has a wonderful light about it. And it comes towards you. And you have eye contact. And this great feeling of light explodes in your heart. And the presence becomes right in front of you. And if it's an animal, maybe it touches your hands with its nose. And you feel that direct connection. Or maybe if it's a human presence of some kind, it sits in front of you and holds your hands. And you feel this energy flowing between you. You feel this light filling you, opening you beyond where you feel you could possibly be open. So this great feeling of joy opens in you. A great feeling of possibility. And you recognize that you are that. You are already that divine presence, that there's no separation between you and the divine presence in front of you. And not only that, but this whole place you are in is divine. And the trees and the stream and the birds, and whatever is in that place is divine. That all is filled with this divine light, divine love. Whatever sounds there are singing the joy of this divinity, are singing songs of praise. There's joy and laughter and full possibility. And you stay quietly in this place for a while, in the silence, feeling with great amazement and deep humility that you are that everything is that, and there's no separation. So stay in this silent place for a few minutes. And then when you're ready, take another couple of deep breaths. Feeling your feet on the floor and coming back to the present moment. So the light of the divine in one kindles the light in another. We see each other in a moment of pure recognition, acknowledging the divine in each of us. The divine in me greets the divine in you. Namaste, namaskar, pranam.